Greetings, and welcome to the Choosing Your Schools workshop from the Pre-Med and Pre-Health Advising Program at Northeastern University. Today, we will go over the various selection factors that one must consider when applying to medical, dental, physician assistant, podiatry, optometry, and veterinary school. The first thing to consider when applying to a health professional program is GPA and entrance exam scores. It's important to note that GPA and entrance exam scores do assist students in getting interviews at particular institutions. However, a student's experiential preparation also assists and becomes very important at the interview itself. Therefore, students should consider metrics and apply to both realistic and aspirational schools where they feel they are a good fit for the particular program. It's all about balance. This slide looks a little bit deeper into how GPA and entrance exams will contribute to a student's competitiveness for a particular medical or dental or optometry, PA, podiatry, or veterinary school. Average GPAs of accepted students for MD, DO, and dental programs vary slightly and vary depending on their science GPA and cumulative GPA. It's important for you to consider how your GPA compares to these numbers and how these numbers might be different depending on the schools that you apply to. The average accepted DAT score is about a 20.3. For pre-dental applicants, it's important to consider how your DAT score compares to the average, but also to the specific schools to which you apply. The same is true for folks applying to medical schools, where the average MCAT varies quite significantly between MD and DO programs, those being about a 511 and about a 503, respectively. Before we go into how you will select the schools to which you apply, it's important to understand the admission committee structure and all the elements that create an admissions committee. These include the dean or director of admissions, the admissions committee itself, the application subcommittee, your individual interviewers, the admissions clerical staff, so the folks who work in the office, and the only non-human element here is any computer sorting software system that is used by admissions to determine a student's candidacy. There are multiple phases to the review of any applicant to a health professional program. The first review is based off of metrics. So say a school gets about 10,000 applicants in a single year. Some schools have a computer program that reviews and ranks all applicants based on a few metrics like GPA and MCAT. A smaller committee might review the qualified applicants to balance gender, age, and other factors. This leaves a school with about 800 qualified applicants after this computer sort, for example. The second stage in the process, we take the 800 applicant files, and those are sent to the school's admissions committee. For large schools, there may be many subcommittees, each getting a predetermined number of applicant files. This subcommittee will read the personal statement, they will evaluate the quality of an applicant's experiences, and review letters of evaluation in order to rank their subset of applicants. The committee usually does not focus on GPA or entrance exam, as these elements have already been screened for. The admissions committee then compiles the subcommittee's rankings and creates a file rank of the applicants that remain, granting about 400 of these applicants interviews. The third stage in this review is the interview. Of the 400 students remaining, perhaps only 350, or 340 in this case, will accept the interview invitation. Interviewers are typically members of the admissions subcommittee and also a clinical or research faculty of the main hospital, clinic, or school. The interview can take many formats, including individual interviews, group interviews, or multiple mini interviews. And in this interview, the interviewer is looking for sincerity, integrity, and empathy. They like interviewees to display and be comfortable with vulnerability. They are looking for how well you, the interviewee, can connect interpersonally. The interviewer does not focus on GPA, entrance exam scores, or even letters of recommendation or experiences unless they come up organically in the interview itself, as these elements have already been screened for. We're left with about 140 students who might receive acceptance letters, of which maybe 90 will fully accept and matriculate to the medical school. So, now that you know a little bit more about the review process of an applicant, how can you go about selecting which schools to apply to that will be competitive and a good fit for you? So before you begin, think of the following. Why do you feel that you would be happy in this profession? What do you hope to receive from your medical education? What personal experiences, like co-op, for example, are essential to your career goals? Know your learning style. What do you need at an institution that will help support your personal well-being? And what do you picture yourself doing in the future? Where are you and who are you with? The following selection factors can help you evaluate a school and determine if it's a good fit for you academically and personally. I usually tell students to start by viewing the school's mission and vision. Know what the school's all about. Then review their curriculum. Consider if it's a pass-fail institution, for example. Next, you might consider support services, such as health and wellness programs. Consider the cost of the school and the projected debt on graduation. Other factors can include location of the school, whether it's close to home or where you want to practice. Consider how soon you might get patient contact. Pre-screen the school's secondary questions. See what types of questions they're asking and what's important to them. You might be interested to know what schools will do to help prepare you for your board exams, or whether they have branch campuses. Another thing you might consider, if you know generally what specialties you might be interested in, are residency placements or clinical sites affiliated with the hospital. These are just some of the factors to consider if you are looking to create a schools list that's dynamic and comprehensive. Going into a little bit more detail on geographic location, it's important to note that most schools strongly favor in-state applicants. In fact, some only accept out-of-state applicants from specific regions. Some do not accept out-of-state applicants at all. An example would be the University of Washington. If your AMCAS, meaning your application legal residence, is not in Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, or Idaho, you will be considered as an out-of-region applicant for the University of Washington. At the University of Washington, out-of-region applicants must undergo additional screening processes and will only be considered for admission to the MD program if they have an exceptional record of service and or come from a disadvantaged background. To me, this indicates that the University of Washington statistically would be a very challenging school to get into if you are not from their region. Similarly, the University of Massachusetts, while they have no restrictions on the number of out-of-state applicants that can apply or that can be accepted, you can see very clearly from these statistics taken from the Medical School Admissions Requirements webpage in 2018 that the number of verified applications for out-of-state applicants versus the number of out-of-state applicants who matriculated is very large. So statistically, it's much more challenging to get into the University of Massachusetts as an out-of-state applicant. And though many of our applicants have lived in Massachusetts as a member of the Northeastern community for several years, in order to be considered an in-state resident of Massachusetts, one must have lived and filed taxes in the state for 7 years. So this means, tragically, that admissions committees do not care where you would prefer to attend medical school, even if that's somewhere sunny and warm all year round. What ultimately makes a good decision in terms of you attending and applying to a medical school is how the geographic location might relate to your personal fit and interest in that institution. And typically, when you're centering on a particular geographic region in your schools list, consider mostly private schools versus public institutions unless you are an in-state applicant. Another thing to consider, or actually to be weary of, is the U.S. News and World Report rankings of the best medical schools. As you can see here, the way that the rankings are weighted is very heavy on research and much less on acceptance rate, MCAT, GPA, or even primary care. So the U.S. News and World Report rankings might not depict the best picture in terms of the true curriculum that will be delivered and the level of rigor associated with getting into a particular school. From the Dean of Admissions at Yale University, we have this quote. I think it was frustrating everyone is that there's nothing really in the formula for these rankings that is really evaluating the quality of medical education. You can see how this translates to funding, research funding, which is going down for a lot of schools out there. And something to consider as research funding goes down, some schools are in more of a financial deficit or burden. So you see things happening like what happened with Drexel last year with some of their hospitals closed, their research dollars went down. So these are things to consider. But I think ultimately what we want you to know is that the U.S. News and World Report rankings aren't always going to be the best indicator of where you should apply, particularly if you're not focused in on research institutions. Let's consider another selection factor that we already talked about, and this one being affiliated hospitals. So it's reasonable to assume that if a school is in a particular area, that their affiliated hospitals are going to be nearby. But that's not always the case. So we have two examples here, just right in Boston, of BU and Harvard. The map that shows the third-year clerkship sites for Boston University shows you very clearly that a lot of their affiliated hospitals are outside of the Boston metropolitan area, going as far north into Maine and Vermont, and as far south into Rhode Island. What this means is that students might be traveling a lot to go to their clerkship sites. They'll need a car to get to those places. And then they might not be in the city that you expect that they would. This compared to Harvard. And you can see the principal clinical experience locations for Harvard, if you're familiar with the abbreviations, are Boston Children's Hospital, Beth Israel Deaconess, Brigham and Women's, Massachusetts General Hospital, all hospitals that are centrally located near the school and in the city that you would expect them to be based off of the location of the medical school itself. So again, another selection factor to consider is where are the affiliated clinical sites for this particular medical school? And are those affiliated clinical sites places where you can see yourself doing your clerkship? Another thing you might consider are things like the simulation lab at the particular institution. So if we look at this kind of snapshot of a web page from a medical school, this really shows a kind of an outdated kind of picture of a sim lab with a mannequin that seems like, maybe they've not updated in quite some years. You have to imagine that schools' websites are going to show the best pictures and the best representation of what they have to offer. And so we look at this particular web page from this particular school and compare it to, again, a different school. And we see here that this simulation lab has real patients. They have real hospital gurneys, a real patient room. You can see how this is a much more detailed and much more advanced version of a simulation lab than the previous slide. So again, considering the environment you'll be learning in and what you're kind of seeking out of your medical education and from the curriculum is going to be important. And not all websites for schools are created equal. So we want you to look very closely at them and really take into consideration what's going to make you happy at that institution. So where do you begin? I would say that one of the best resources I've used in my time as a pre-medical advisor is the MSAR. So for folks applying to allopathic medicine, MD programs, the AAMC has this database called the Medical School Admissions Requirements. In that database, it will list every medical school in the U.S. It will give you information off of each school's average MCAT, GPA, the number of students who apply versus the number of students who interview, acceptance rates. They'll let you know the average cost of indebtedness to each student, their number of research dollars, their commitment to primary care, their mission, information about the curriculum, etc. Very useful resource. It's $28 for a 1-year subscription, or now they have an option for a 2-year subscription for $36. Another resource is for dental medicine. It's the ADEA's Dental School Explorer. It provides all that same information I just mentioned that the MSAR provides for medical schools. Theirs is a different format. It's a PDF format, and it's $25. The Osteopathic Medicine, Osteopathic Medical College Information Book is a similar resource. It's free. If you're applying to DO schools, I would definitely recommend downloading that or bookmarking it. For folks applying to podiatry schools, the Podiatric Medical College Information Book is along the same lines. Unfortunately, the the Association for PA Programs doesn't have a specific book that's like the Dental School Explorer or the MSAR, but there is an outside resource titled The Applicant's Manual of Physician Assistant Programs. It's available for purchase on Amazon, and we found it to be very accurate and a great resource for students applying. So while it's not on, the PA program directory, which is another free resource, it's definitely detailed and comprehensive and can help our PA students create their schools list. A note to my pre-PA students, for you guys, choosing your school should really begin as soon as you identify yourself on the pre-PA track. the pre-PA track varies very much school to school with regard to the required course of study. So that's why we would want you to create your schools list much earlier. So if you're listening to this and you're just getting started on your physician assistant pathway, try to create a chart, a spreadsheet to track your PA schools sooner than later. Finally, veterinary medical admissions requirements, the VMSAR, similar to podiatry, DO, dental, and MD, $35 subscription for that. These are all updated annually, so you can ensure that you're getting the most current statistics in terms of admission for each of these program types with a subscription or a purchase of any of these items. So kind of moving forward, I can give you some examples of how each school might differ with regard to different selection factors that we'll consider for each school that you add to your list. So we start with the mission statement. And when we look at the mission statement, you might find that a lot of the schools you look at read very similarly. But there are others that give snapshots that are very specific to the school itself. So I'm going to show us a couple. I'm going to start with Harvard. So Harvard's mission statement is to nurture a diverse, inclusive community dedicated to alleviating suffering and improving health and well-being for all through excellence in teaching and learning, discovery and scholarship, and service and leadership. So we can see from this one sentence mission statement that there's a few things that are very important to Harvard: leadership, research, and academia. Now that might sound pretty obvious to you, that all medical schools are really focused in on that, but let's compare that to another school's mission statement. So let's go to the University of New England. The University of New England prepares students to thrive in a rapidly changing world, in doing so to improve the health of people, communities, and our planet. So here we can see that there's nothing about teaching or research per se or leadership. Instead, University of New England is really focused on community health, and is focused on the health and clinical care of others. So for someone who's really clinically focused, UNE makes a lot of sense. For someone who might be much more interested in research and has a stronger research background, Harvard might be a good option for you. Let's look at two more before we move on. I like to look at Loma Linda because of its uniqueness. Okay, so Loma Linda's mission. The mission of the School of Medicine is to continue the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus Christ. Now, thinking of Loma Linda, it's situated in Southern California, a beautiful sunny place that someone might initially think is the perfect place for them to go to medical school. But if this mission doesn't resonate with you, this probably isn't a good fit for you in terms of an institution. So you need to consider the uniqueness of each institution and what their goals are and their vision is when kind of comparing that to yourself and whether you'd be a good fit there. So this was a little bit about mission statement. Now we can consider a different selection factor that we reviewed earlier. And this one is the curriculum. So how do curriculums differ school to school? And so first we might look at the MD curriculum at Johns Hopkins. So we can see here that the MD curriculum for Johns Hopkins kind of talks about a little bit more about the enhanced opportunities that they have for their students. This actually doesn't provide a ton of information, perhaps. Here we go. This gives a little bit more about I hate to say it, but this isn't the best one to choose. Let's pick a different one. Okay. All right, so let's do an overview of Pitt. All right, this is much better. So this kind of gives you an insight into the education provided at the University of Pittsburgh, starting with their MD program and other dual degree programs. From there, you can look kind of more into what their medical education looks like, what types of like opportunities they have, like summer research, etc. And like looking specifically at the School of Medicine, you can see what current students are doing, a little bit more about the curriculum description. What is their standardized patient program? When are you getting this contact with folks? Learning more from the faculty, et cetera. So most medical schools are gonna, and dental schools, et cetera, are going to have a webpage that's a little bit more comprehensive than the first one we looked at, that kind of go into the nitty gritty of what the curriculum looks like, how it's designed, and also, how grades are posted. Is it a pass-fail institution? Do they assign grades? How do they rank their students? Etc. So looking into the curriculum is definitely something to look at. With regard to pass-fail curriculums, they do often foster more collaboration among students. You could also look into dual degrees as it pertains to the curriculum if that's something that you're interested in. Doing an MPH with your MD program or master. I mean, Tufts is interesting. They have a Master of Arts with International Relations and MBA dual degree program. So definitely things to keep in mind when selecting your schools. All right, so when we think about other selection factors, something we mentioned before, again, was residency placement. So match lists are made public. Every year, match lists are made public. So if you're interested to know where students are matching in terms of residency, just do a quick Google search for, a particular school plus residency match list. And it can give you some insight into, where it is that schools are the students from that school are actually going, right? So if we look at Temple, for example, and we look at, this is the most recent residency match results. I mean, they're physically located all across the country, but then they break it down into top specialties. So we see internal medicine and family medicine being amongst the top. And also the institutions. So it looks like they're keeping people close by at Temple, and even in Pennsylvania for the most part. And then you can kind of look more closely at the complete residency match results by specialty, but this gives you a general idea of where these students are ending up. And the same is going to be true for any school. These are three schools on the continental US, but I think that one thing that's a misconception amongst a lot of students is, what are the residency match rates for places outside of the US? Like Sackler School of Medicine in Israel, or Caribbean schools like St. George's or Ross University. You might find that some international schools have lower residency placements, but the three that I just mentioned have very, very high residency placements. So don't take them off your list unnecessarily, because I know there is a misconception that some of these institutions don't have a good match list. So look at the facts and the figures, look at the data before you make your decision. And, getting into a more practical point of view, another big element to figuring out where you're going to apply is cost. And so, two schools that are very starkly different would be this far left versus far right. Uniformed Services University versus Chicago Medical School. So Uniformed Services University does kind of come with a service commitment to the military. So know that the cost is offset by service. You don't have to pay to go to medical school at Uniformed Services University. In fact, you receive a salary as a student of over $60,000 a year. So you get paid to go to medical school. But you do owe service. You owe about 8 years of service to the Army. And you will likely do your residency at an Army residency, at an Army hospital, And certainly you can look more into what that looks like. But if you're interested in joining the military and being a military physician, Uniform Services University will be the most cost-effective way to do that. There are scholarships for folks who want to go to a different medical school, a private medical school, for example, but are still interested in military medicine. So they could go to they could go to Harvard, for example, on the Health Professions Scholarship Program, have their medical school paid for. They don't get quite as high of a salary. They do get a stipend, and you only owe 4 years of service after that. So Health Professions Scholarship Program, Uniform Services University, those options are going to actually earn you some money in terms of going to medical school. But then looking kind of all the way to the right at the costs and fees of kind of going to a private school for 4 years, Chicago Med is about just over $200,000. That's the average indebtedness of their students. And then you look at a state school like the University of North Carolina, which is about 118, so more than $100,000 less than Chicago, which is a private school. This is why we encourage you to apply to your state schools, folks. A lot less in debt on that front. So we want you to apply to your state schools and kind of consider those financial figures. All right, so we kind of talked about affiliated hospitals before. Again, look at where the affiliated hospitals are in relation to the schools themselves. In terms of special programs, some schools have really interesting special programs or, features about them that would make them a good fit for you. And so, for example, Tufts University has a Maine track for folks who are from Maine or interested in practicing rural medicine. Statistically, it's easier to get into Tufts via the Maine track, but you really have to make sure that you have a strong commitment to the type of medicine and medical education that's going to be taught through that program. On the other side of things, you have Drexel, and Drexel, is now a school that was, historically comprised of two different medical schools, one of which was the first women's medical school. And so there's a strong commitment to women's health at Drexel, and, considering that and how that might kind of align with your own experiences, be it through education or mentorship, certainly could make it a great fit for you. All right. And so again, kind of moving along the line of all of the selection factors to consider, again, you might consider secondary questions, because secondary questions will showcase to you what's important to the school. The AMCAS application's the same for everyone. So you're not going to get a lot from it in terms of uniqueness and highlighting your fit for a particular institution. And oftentimes it's not until you get your secondary questions that you're like, wow, I don't know that this was the right fit for me, or if this school was the right one to add to my list. So let's prevent that from happening by looking at the secondary questions sooner. And so kind of looking at a school like East Virginia's secondary questions, we'll get a sense of what's important to them in terms of their applicants. So, some general questions here. Describe your exposure to medicine. What do you think about being a physician? Describe your medical career. And then finally, the kicker, please indicate your reasons for applying to Eastern Virginia Medical School. Now, something to know about Eastern Virginia Medical School, it's public, and they very rarely accept out of state. So here is that person's opportunity, you, if you're applying there, to talk about why they should accept you and your connection to Virginia if you're going to be applying. Let's look at another. Let's look at Pritzker, a more popular school amongst our students. So Pritzker is going to ask you to tell them a little bit more about how you would enhance the diversity of their school and advance their mission. And their mission also kind of pertaining to inspiring diversity within their student body and kind of how that's going to lead to the betterment of medicine and science and humanity. So we know that diversity is a huge thing for Pritzker. It's the first question they asked last year. It's in their mission statement. And so kind of thinking about how diversity is important to you, if it's something that's very important to you, why, so that you can share that with them. So this kind of gives us insight into what this particular school might be looking for from their candidates and perhaps why you'd be a good fit for their school in particular. All right, moving right along to global opportunities. Some medical schools and dental and DO schools have opportunities to travel globally, whether it's through clinics that they've established overseas or formalized programs. So if you are someone who has had global experiences and wants to see more of that and have that be a part of your future medical career, you might consider looking into whether or not a school has a global program or global opportunity so that you can get involved in that while you're a medical school student. All right, and kind of a couple final selection factors that you can consider if you're interested in research. Research opportunities are going to be super important for you. See what type of funding there is for research, whether research is built right into the curriculum. You know, we have a few examples here, but you might also consider, Duke. Their curriculum is structured in such a way that their third year of medical school is entirely dedicated to research. And so if that's not something you're interested in, you might consider not applying there. And that kind of brings us back down to patient contact, right? Quinnipiac and Hofstra both really dedicated to care, to clinical care. Quinnipiac to primary care, Hofstra specifically emergency medicine. And they're getting these experiences, the first year, sometimes within the first week of medical school. But for Duke, that's not the case. Your clinical stuff isn't going to begin until much later. And you can look more closely at their curriculum, but you'll see it builds out this third year. So everything's kind of smushed into year 1 and 2, where typically it would be built out into 3 years. And this third year is just dedicated to your scholarly research. This curriculum is unique. Most medical school curriculums don't look like this. So if this is something that really appeals to you, looking for more schools like Duke University's curriculum kind of graphic, then that's how you should focus your search. But do keep in mind that, not all medical school curriculums are delivered in the same way, even though they cover the same topics. All right, and so finally, I'm going to leave you guys with a little bit of homework here. I encourage you to put together a spreadsheet of your schools, to stay organized, not even just for creating your schools list, but for tracking, when you hear back from schools and your interview feedback and decisions. You want to include information on why you're interested in this school, their admissions data, and the selection factors that made you choose this school to add it to your list. It's something that you're going to refer back to often, especially when you apply and you fill out your secondary applications and prepare for interviews. So whatever system makes sense for you. For me, I like to save these types of things in Excel. That's what you should stick with and stay organized with. Later, this list is going to develop. You can add notes to it, and it'll help you decide which school you might be attending ultimately. So with that, I am going to formally conclude the Choosing Your Schools workshop.